Hi everyone, welcome to Meeting the Social Emotional Needs of Gifted Students. This is a professional development workshop for gifted teachers of grades kindergarten through 5th. My name is Ashley Jenkins. I am currently a kindergarten teacher, but I have also taught pre-K and 3rd grade. I also have my gifted certification. Today I'm going to be presenting to you some different strategies for working with social emotional needs of gifted learners. But I'm also going to be sharing with you some findings of my research that I conducted with Carla Wallace. So before we get started, I'd like for you to turn and talk with your colleagues at your table, and I'd like for you to name a characteristic of the gifted students you work with that sets them apart from non-gifted students. So go ahead and take a few minutes to do that now, and then we'll share some of your findings. All right, thank you for taking the time to do that. I would want us to get started with that because one of the themes that Carla and I found in our research with our different interviews with gifted teachers was some recurring characteristics that we did see mentioned quite a bit. And these are just a list of a few of them. So perfectionist, eager, anxious, overexcitability, having really strong ideas and being very set in those ideas, intense, extreme, having polar dispositions, and then also being very creative and also very competitive. So I'm not sure if any of those at all came up in your discussions or your conversations, but I wanted to get us started with that to keep in mind how generally unique and different our gifted learners are compared to our non-gifted ones. So my goals for today are for us to collaborate with your colleagues and discuss some of the social emotional learning needs of your gifted students that they might face, and then also create strategies to use in helping meet the social emotional needs of gifted learners. I want to share with you a little about our research. So the purpose of our research was to explore the need for a differentiated social emotional curriculum for gifted learners. And the research questions we were trying to answer were, do teachers of gifted learners feel that these students have different affective needs than non-gifted identified learners, affective meaning social emotional? And do these teachers believe that a differentiated social and emotional curriculum is necessary for gifted learners to reach their full potential? And also throughout this presentation, you'll hear me say SEL. SEL just stands for social and emotional learning. So we designed a qualitative interview study where we interviewed 5 different gifted teachers across the metro Atlanta area, all with a minimum of 1 year or more of experience with working with gifted learners. So in our findings, after coding our interviews, we found 4 major themes. That was those characteristics of gifted learners that I mentioned at the very beginning of this workshop, those things that generally just set gifted learners apart from non-gifted ones. Also, the manifestation of feelings in the classroom setting. Also, strategies for teaching SEL to gifted learners that the different teachers had either tried or were acquainted with. And then the teacher's need for gifted SEL instruction. So through our findings, our research questions were answered affirmatively. All of the teachers we interviewed all agreed that they do see a difference in those affective needs of gifted learners, and they all expressed a need for a curriculum to address these social and emotional components. So our research was framed around emotional intelligence theory, and this is a theory that was made popular by a psychologist named Daniel Goleman. It has roots in other theories, including Gardner's multiple intelligences, but it was kind of made popular in the mid-90s by Daniel Goleman. And he looked at 5 factors, which were self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. And it started out being really popular for use in businesses, but it's now starting to appear more in education as this big push for social emotional intelligence and SEL is becoming more popular and more acknowledged in schools. So Carla and I wanted to know how might these emotional intelligence factors affect gifted learners. So I'm actually going to give you a few minutes now to follow this link that I've given you. If you could pull out your personal laptop device or iPad and follow this link to take this quiz, and it's actually going to tell you how emotionally intelligent you are according to this quiz. I'd like for you to take a few minutes to do that now and then also share your results with your colleagues, or if you're not comfortable sharing exactly your results, maybe talk about how you feel like this might affect or explain some of your teaching with your gifted learners. Take a few minutes to do that now. All right, well, I hope you found that quiz informative or somewhat helpful in your day-to-day thinking about how you might interact with your gifted students or your colleagues as well. Before we keep going, I'd like for you to take another survey, and this is actually called Assessing Services to Meet the Social and Emotional Needs of High Ability Students. So in this survey, you're going to just assess how your school or your gifted classroom in particular meets the needs, those social emotional needs of your gifted learners. After you take this, I want you to turn and talk to your colleagues and compare your findings. Specifically, did you have similar or different ratings? What areas does your school have strength in when it comes to meeting those SEL needs? And then what areas does it need improvement in of meeting those SEL needs of your gifted learners? So go ahead and take a few minutes and do that now. This is going to be really important for framing what kind of strategies we need to help you in meeting those SEL needs of your gifted students. All right, thank you for taking that survey and thank you for sharing your results. So now I want to go into some different strategies for meeting the SEL needs of gifted learners. And some of these I'm going to start out mentioning were ones specifically mentioned in our research. The first one is role play. So this could be practice for certain situations, maybe ones that have been recurring in your classroom or ones that could be coming up, such as an upcoming project night where students are going to have to do some public speaking or communicating of their ideas, or working with a partner or group. Collaboration issues were something that were mentioned quite frequently as being an issue in gifted classrooms during our interviews. So several teachers mentioned using role play to have students act out different scenarios or asking questions to anticipate what could happen, possible reactions or feelings that their classmates could have in certain situations. Another strategy is a decision-making matrix, which I'll show you an example of on a future slide. And in this decision-making matrix, students basically weigh the pros and cons of different decisions. This is something that is used in group work. So if you're working in a group or a partnership and two students are having trouble or difficulty reaching an agreement, again, we know one of those characteristics is they can be quite competitive and have strong ideas. This can maybe help them kind of break past getting stuck on one idea and moving forward based on what's best for the group or what's best for the assignment. Also, self-reflective practices. So this was something mentioned by teachers who had students experiencing meltdowns or other traumatic moments based on perfectionism. So a student who just can't get past turning in an assignment because they are really stuck on making it perfect, maybe having them just take a break and work on some self-reflective practices either that day or the next day. And I also have some examples of these in upcoming slides I'll show you as well. And then the last one that was suggested quite frequently was morning meetings. So whether it's in the child's general classroom or in the gifted classroom, just taking a few moments every morning to check in and ask what went well yesterday or what went well when you worked with your group or your partner, or what would you redo or change for next time. And then finally, one teacher suggests that above all else, just keep in mind that, as we mentioned before, our gifted learners are unique and they have different needs. So there's often not a one-size-fits-all solution. A lot of it is just being in the moment, knowing that child and knowing what they need, knowing that they may not respond to what generally worked for the rest of the classroom, and just taking some time to see what they really need from you. So here's an example of some of those self-reflective practices that I mentioned. These are just two activities that come from a larger set of resources for emotional intelligence self-reflective practices. I posted the link to this down at the bottom for your resource that you can use. And these are just different ones that can help you practice different communication skills, anticipating different moments that might come up in the classroom, naming different emotions. I think these are all great activities that you could use, whether you want to use them. You don't have to use them all at once, or just pick out different ones that you could use maybe a certain day or during morning meeting. These are all a set of great resources. Here is an example of the decision-making matrix. So the decision-making matrix presents students with different choices, and they have to weigh the pros and cons of each choice and then finally make a decision. So this is something you could use with students who are having difficulty collaborating. Again, it may not be the most time-efficient thing if you're on a time crunch, so you want to keep that in mind. This might be something you would anticipate before starting group work or starting partner work. And then finally, I want to talk a little about curriculum suggestions. So SEL curriculums have become more popular and they are appearing more in classrooms. Some of the ones that were mentioned in our research interviews were Second Step, the Responsive Classroom, who sponsors morning meeting, and then also an organization called CASEL promotes different social emotional curriculums. But if you're using a curriculum, you definitely want to keep the following in mind: that curriculums can be overly sequential, something that our gifted students typically don't like, whether it's in academics or in social emotional learning. So you want to keep in mind that that can make them bored or also angry, just because they typically don't like to go in a certain order, especially if they can skip ahead. These also typically are not created for all gifted students' needs. It's typically created for a general classroom's needs. So again, keeping in mind that those two things may not always match. A lot of SEL curriculums also have a lot of forced partnering, and again, just knowing how strong ideas and competitive our gifted learners can be, and sometimes really just do prefer to work by themselves, that could be really difficult and a hard situation for them. And then also, these SEL curriculums tend to assume that everyone is on age-level behaviors, but typically we know that gifted learners' development is asynchronous, so they may not be developmentally on the same page as someone who is the same age as them. So those are all things to keep in mind. Definitely not saying not to use an SEL curriculum. Just make sure to do some research and know that you'll probably have to tweak some things if you're going to use one. And also, here are some tips for gifted teachers. These come from the American Psychological Association. Realize that grades and achievement behavior are not reliable indicators of gifted students' stress levels or coping. They are often able to maintain high achievement even in the face of considerable psychological distress. So just because a student is high achieving or doing very well, they may not have the coping skills that they need. Help gifted children who struggle with overly critical, self-evaluative concerns to reframe their expectations. Perfectionism was definitely something that came up quite a bit in our research. So you want to find ways to help students, again, just self-reflect and self-evaluate their needs and their expectations of themselves. You want to monitor students who are achieving at very high levels in multiple domains because they can feel even more pressure than the average gifted student. Be careful about encouraging ultra-competitive attitudes or classrooms. We tend to think that gifted learners all like competition and they're all competitive, and that's not always the case, which can cause them a lot of stress and unhappiness. And then finally, you want to keep in mind that a lot of our gifted learners are from different cultural backgrounds, so you want to be culturally responsive and promote the emotional understanding of all backgrounds in your classroom. All right, so let's take a minute to practice. I'm going to present you here with a scenario, and I want you to turn and talk to your colleagues about how you might handle this situation, and then we're going to go over some of your answers. All right, so let's talk about this scenario. Your gifted students are working in groups on a STEM project. Two students start arguing over whose idea is the best. They cannot reach an agreement, and they refuse to complete the project. So I wanted you to turn and talk about this for several reasons. There's really no perfect strategy, right? As one of our teachers suggested earlier, that there could be more than one way to solve this. So this was actually a real scenario that came up in one of our interviews. This actually happened in a real gifted teacher's classroom. It may have happened in yours as well. And one of the things that the teachers suggested was that decision-making matrix. She actually had the two students make a list of pros and cons, kind of helping them weigh which idea might have some good parts and which might have some bad parts, and actually helped them compromise and found a way to work on it together and include a little bit of both students' ideas. Now, again, ideally, that may not be the most time efficient way to do something, but it is an option there if you do have the time for it. And also, one of the things she brought up is that sometimes it's okay just if group work doesn't work and partnerships don't work. Again, you don't want to force those partnerships and force that collaboration with gifted learners if they really do just want to work on their own. This teacher suggested that in some situations, it really is just okay to let them work by themselves. And if possible, in partnerships and group work, let students choose who they're going to work with if they have similar ideas or interests. So that's something you might want to keep in mind. Finally, for today, I'd like for you to create an SEL plan of your own, thinking about a potential issue that you're having in your classroom right now, or maybe you want to partner up with a colleague with an issue that you're both facing or something that could be coming up. Focus on an emotional intelligence area, and then think of a possible strategy you could use, whether it's one of the ones we've mentioned today or one that you have that has worked really well. So go ahead and take a few minutes to do that now. All right, thanks for creating those lessons. Before we meet again, for the next time that we meet again, I would love to hear how those lessons worked in your classroom and see what we need to tweak or revise that might help you better for next time. So before we go, I just have some final thoughts. What questions or concerns do you still have about SEL for gifted students? What strategies have you used in your own classrooms that work? And then what's one area of SEL for gifted learners that you hope to improve on before our next session? If you could take a few minutes to share those ideas with me now, or feel free to email me, and I would love for us to get back together so I can share all of potential strategies or questions that you have with the whole workshop. And finally, here's just a list of different resources, some of which we talked about today. The APA website. SING is an organization for supporting the emotional needs of gifted learners that has a lot of great suggestions. They also have a big social media presence and are often tweeting out different tips or advice. So they're a great resource. CASEL has a list of all of those different social emotional learning curriculums you might be interested in researching. And then finally, Yale University actually has their own center dedicated completely to emotional intelligence, where they complete research and perform different activities based on emotional intelligence every day, and they have a lot of great resources for teachers that you may find are helpful. Well, that is all I have for today. I want to thank you all for attending. I hope you found this helpful. And again, I would like us to meet again in the future to go over what has worked well and what has not, what you still maybe have questions about regarding these social emotional learning needs of gifted learners.